What if I told you that two of the most beloved voices in gospel music walked away from one of the biggest platforms in Christian entertainment, and nobody saw it coming? No scandal, no headlines, no dramatic farewell tour. Just silence. And that silence has left thousands of fans asking the same haunting question. What really happened? Today we're diving deep into the untold story of Linda Randle and Reggie Smith's mysterious departure from the Gaither Vocal Band. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why their exit might be the most powerful testimony they've ever given. Before we get into the heart of this story, let me paint you a picture. Imagine dedicating decades of your life to something you love, pouring your soul into every performance, touching millions of lives, and then one day you simply step back into the shadows. No explanation, no press conference, just gone. That's exactly what happened with Linda Randle and Reggie Smith, and the internet has been buzzing with theories ever since. Some fans whisper about hidden conflicts. Others speculate about health crises or family drama. But here's what nobody's talking about, and it's the thing that makes this story absolutely extraordinary. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will completely change how you think about success, ministry, and knowing when to let go. The Gaither Vocal Band isn't just another gospel group. When Bill Gaither founded this ensemble in the early 1980s, he created something that transcended music. It became a movement. The Gaither Homecoming series transformed living rooms across America into sanctuary, bringing families together around their television sets every week. This wasn't just entertainment. It was ministry wrapped in four-part harmony. And it touched souls in ways that traditional church services sometimes couldn't. Generation after generation grew up with these voices as the soundtrack to their faith journey. Weddings, funerals, Sunday dinners, road trips. The Gaither sound was there, weaving itself into the fabric of Christian culture. And within this powerhouse of talent, two voices stood out with an almost supernatural ability to reach into your chest and squeeze your heart. Linda Randle's deep, soul-shaking contralto could make grown men weep, while Reggie Smith's versatile tenor brought a smoothness and spiritual poise that felt like a warm embrace. Together, though never officially a duo, they represented something rare in the world of Christian music: authenticity that you could feel in your bones. Now here's where the story gets really interesting, and this is the part that most people completely miss. Linda Randle didn't just show up one day and join a gospel group. Her story is woven through the very fabric of contemporary Christian music in ways that will blow your mind. Born into a musically gifted family in Washington, D.C., Linda carried a bloodline of talent that read like a who's who of Christian music royalty. Her brother, Michael Tate. Yes, that Michael Tate from DC Talk and the Newsboys, one of the most influential Christian rock artists of all time. Think about that for a moment. While her brother was revolutionizing Christian music with hip-hop and rock fusion, Linda chose a different path entirely. She dove into the deep waters of Southern gospel and traditional worship, bringing with her a voice that critics described as having the power to crack open heaven itself. When she joined the Gaither family in the late 1990s, something magical happened. Her performance of God on the Mountain became the stuff of legend. I'm not exaggerating when I say that thousands of people trace their spiritual breakthroughs back to hearing Linda sing that song. The way she delivered those lyrics, with a conviction that came from somewhere beyond technique or training, created moments where the veil between earth and heaven seemed paper-thin. But here's what made Linda truly special, and this is critical to understanding why her departure matters so much. Linda wasn't just a performer chasing the next big stage. She was a minister who happened to have an extraordinary voice. While cameras weren't rolling and spotlights weren't shining, Linda was in the trenches doing real ministry work. She spoke at women's conferences across the country, not the glamorous kind with thousands in attendance, but the intimate gatherings where hurting women needed someone to tell them they weren't alone. She counseled individuals struggling with addiction, grief, and despair. She prayed with people in hospital rooms and living rooms and church basements. This wasn't about building a brand or expanding her platform. This was about obedience to a calling that ran deeper than applause. And that's the first clue to understanding her eventual departure. When you're wired for intimate, hands-on ministry, the machinery of large-scale production and constant touring can start to feel like it's pulling you away from your true purpose rather than supporting it. Now let's talk about Reggie Smith, because his story adds another fascinating layer to this narrative. Reggie wasn't just a member of the Gaither Vocal Band. He was a musician's musician, the kind of artist that other professionals point to with respect and maybe a little bit of envy. His journey through gospel music reads like a masterclass in versatility and humility. He could sing baritone, lead, or tenor depending on what the arrangement needed. He could step into any gap, fill any hole, make any song work. This kind of adaptability is incredibly rare, and it made Reggie absolutely invaluable to the Gaither organization. Session work, live performances, television recordings, studio albums. Reggie was everywhere, always delivering, always making everyone around him sound better. And here's something beautiful that often gets overlooked. Reggie shared this journey with his wife, Lynda Love Smith, creating a partnership that fans adored. Watching them perform together had a tenderness to it, a genuine affection and mutual support that reminded everyone what Christian marriage could look like when it's done right. They weren't trying to be a power couple or build an empire. They were simply two people using their gifts together in service of something greater than themselves. The dynamic that Reggie brought to the Gaither Vocal Band went beyond technical skill. There was a spiritual maturity in how he approached every performance, a humility that kept ego at bay, even when he had every right to demand the spotlight. In the cutthroat world of entertainment, where artists fight for their moment and guard their position jealously, Reggie embodied something different. He embodied what it looks like to decrease so that Christ might increase. He was content to be essential without being prominent, to be the foundation without being the facade. And that contentment, that security in his identity and calling, is precisely what makes his decision to step away so powerful and so instructive for all of us. Now here's where we need to address the elephant in the room, because I know what you're thinking. You're wondering if there was some big falling out, some behind-the-scenes drama that nobody wants to talk about. Let me be crystal clear about something, and I want you to really hear this because it's crucial. Linda Randle and Reggie Smith did not leave together. They were not staging some sort of coordinated protest or making a statement by walking away simultaneously. Their departures happened at different times, for different reasons, following different paths. Linda's retreat from the public eye was gradual, starting around 2018 and 2019, a slow fade rather than an abrupt exit. Reggie's departure came later, in mid-2023, and was more noticeable because of his central role in the band's touring lineup. The timing was different, the circumstances were different. The only thing they had in common was the grace with which they handled their transitions. And this is where the story gets really profound, friends, because what we're witnessing here is something that's becoming increasingly rare in our culture. We live in an age where every departure has to be dramatic, where leaving anything requires a all interview, a social media manifesto, or at minimum some shade thrown in Instagram stories. We've been conditioned to expect mess, to anticipate tea being spilled, to wait for someone to break their silence with shocking revelations. But that's not what happened here. Both Linda and Reggie simply recognized that their season in that particular role had come to an end, and they stepped back with dignity, faith, and trust that God had something else for them. Think about how countercultural that is. Think about how much it goes against every instinct our celebrity-obsessed society has cultivated in us. There were no angry tweets, no cryptic Facebook posts, no podcast interviews where they carefully chose their words while clearly being upset about something. Just peace, just trust, just obedience to an internal compass that said it was time for something different. Let me tell you what I believe really happened, and this is based on everything we know about their character, their history, and the nature of long-term ministry. Touring at the level that the Gaither Vocal Band operates is absolutely grueling. We're not talking about occasional performances or weekend gigs. We're talking about a relentless schedule that takes you away from home for weeks at a time, puts you in front of audiences night after night, demands vocal perfection when you're exhausted, and requires you to be spiritually on even when your own soul is running on empty. It's physically demanding in ways that people outside the industry simply cannot comprehend. Your voice is your instrument, and maintaining it requires constant care, discipline, and awareness of your body. Cold can derail a week of performances. Allergies can wreck your range. Age inevitably affects vocal cords no matter how well you care for them. Beyond the physical toll, there's an emotional and spiritual cost that accumulates over time. When you're in ministry, you're not just performing. You're carrying people's burdens with you. You're hearing their stories, praying over their pain, holding space for their grief and desperation. That's beautiful and sacred work, but it's also heavy. It fills your heart even as it drains your reserves. For Lynda, I believe the pull toward more intimate, personal ministry became impossible to ignore. Remember, this is a woman who was never really chasing fame in the first place. Her heart was always oriented toward one-on-one connection, toward sitting across from someone and speaking truth and hope into their specific situation. The bigger the platform got, the more it may have felt like a distraction from what she was truly called to do. There's nothing wrong with large platforms, of course. God uses them mightily, but there's also nothing wrong with recognizing that your particular calling is to the margins, to the quiet moments, to the work that will never trend on social media, but that changes individual lives forever. Lynda's gradual withdrawal from the Gaither spotlight wasn't running away from anything. It was running towards something more aligned with her truest self and deepest conviction. She didn't need the validation of crowds anymore. She didn't need her name on marquees or her face on album covers. She needed to be where God was asking her to be, and that place was smaller, quieter, and probably more challenging than touring with a famous band. For Reggie, I suspect the calculation was similar but with its own unique elements. As someone who served so faithfully for so long, always filling whatever role was needed, always making others shine, there may have come a moment of honest self-assessment. A moment where he had to ask himself some hard questions. What toll is this schedule taking on my marriage, on my health, on my relationship with God outside of performance mode? When's the last time I could just worship without being responsible for how the worship sounds? When's the last time I felt spiritually fed rather than always being the one feeding others? These aren't complaints. These are the kinds of mature, necessary questions that anyone in long-term ministry must wrestle with if they want to finish well. Reggie's decision to step back wasn't abandoning his calling. It was honoring the wholeness of his calling, which includes being a husband, stewarding his health, and making space for personal spiritual growth that isn't constantly tied to production schedules and performance outcomes. Here's something that I think will really resonate with you and it. Something that the church desperately needs to hear right now. We have created a culture where visible ministry is elevated above invisible obedience, where platform is confused with purpose, where stepping back is interpreted as stepping down. But that's not how God operates. Scripture is full of examples of God calling people into seasons of hiddenness, seasons of preparation, seasons of rest and restoration. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before God used him to deliver Israel. Jesus himself withdrew regularly from the crowds to spend time alone with the Father. Paul had his wilderness years after his conversion before his major ministry launched. The rhythm of public and private, of pouring out and being filled up. Speaking and listening, this is woven throughout biblical narrative. It's not a bug in the system. It's a feature. It's how God designed us to function sustainably over the long haul. What Lynda and Reggie have done, whether they fully realize it or not, is model this biblical rhythm for a generation that desperately needs to see it. They've shown us that you can walk away from prominence without losing your purpose. They've demonstrated that faithfulness sometimes means saying no to good opportunity, because God is calling you to something different, not necessarily something bigger. They've lived out the truth that your identity is not determined by how many people recognize your face or your voice, but by whose image you bear and whose voice you're listening to. In a world that measures success by metrics, followers, streams, and ticket sales, they've quietly insisted that success is actually measured by obedience, faithfulness, and alignment with God's timing for your life. And here's where this story should challenge every single one of us, regardless of whether we're in ministry or music or neither. How many of us are clinging to seasons that God has already released us from? How many of us are holding on to titles, positions, or identities that made sense 5 years ago, but that we've outgrown? How many of us are afraid to step back from something visible because we've tied our worth to other people's perception of us? Lynda and Reggie are asking us, through their example, whether we have the courage to follow God in the unknown into the next season, even when it looks like a step down by the world's standards. They're inviting us to consider whether we're serving God's purposes or our ego's needs. They're challenging us to examine whether we're genuinely listening for God's direction or just maintaining momentum because change feels scary. Let's talk about what they're doing now, because this is where the story gets really encouraging. Lynda hasn't disappeared. She's simply reoriented. She continues to release music occasionally, but on her own terms and in her own timing. She hosts online devotionals and women's gatherings that focus on spiritual healing and authentic connection. Through Linda Randle Ministries, she's created spaces for the kind of intimate, transformative work that her heart has always been drawn to. She's active on social media, but not in a way that's trying to build celebrity or drive engagement metrics. Instead, she shares scripture, encouragement, and glimpses of a life that's rooted in peace rather than performance. She's still singing, still ministering, still using her voice. She's just doing it in a way that feeds her soul as much as it serves others. Reggie's path has been similarly beautiful in its authenticity. He performs occasionally with Lady Love, creating moments of ministry that feel personal and intentional rather than obligatory. He's invested himself in mentorship, pouring into the next generation of gospel artists with the wisdom he's gained from decades in the industry. He works behind the scenes as a vocal producer and arranger, using his expertise to help other artists excel. He shows up at certain Gaither events when it makes sense, but he's no longer bound to the grinding tour schedule that defined so many years of his life. He's found a rhythm that honors his gifts while also honoring his humanity, and that's not failure. That's wisdom. The Gaither Vocal Band continues, of course, because the ministry is bigger than any single voice. New artists have stepped into the roles that Lynda and Reggie once filled, bringing their own gifts and testimonies. The legacy continues. The message keeps going out. Lives are still being changed. That's exactly how it should be. One of the most toxic patterns in church culture is the way we build ministries around personality, to the point that we can't imagine the ministry surviving without that particular person. But kingdom work isn't about indispensability. It's about faithfulness in our season, and then releasing the work to others when our season shifts. Lynda and Reggie have modeled that transition with remarkable grace, essentially saying to fans, "Your faith shouldn't be dependent on my voice being in the mix. The gospel is still true. God is still good. The mission continues." There's a passage in Ecclesiastes that keeps coming to mind as I think about this story. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. That's not just poetic language. It's a profound theological truth about how God works in human lives. There are seasons for planting and seasons for harvesting. Seasons for building up and seasons for breaking down. Seasons for speaking and seasons for silence. Seasons for visibility and seasons for obscurity. The wisdom isn't in trying to make every season the same, or in resisting the natural transitions that God orchestrates. The wisdom is in discerning what season you're in and having the courage to fully inhabit it even when it's different from what came before and even when other people don't understand your choices. What if the most powerful thing Linda Randle and Reggie Smith ever did wasn't their most famous performance or their most celebrated recording? What if it was this quiet, dignified stepping back that most of the world didn't even notice? What if the real ministry lesson isn't in their years on stage but in their willingness to leave it? I think that's exactly what's happening here. They're teaching us that you can release something precious without bitterness. You can transition without drama. You can follow God's leading even when it takes you away from applause and recognition. They're showing us that spiritual maturity sometimes looks like knowing when to let go, and that letting go isn't failure, it's faith. So to answer the question that brought you here today, did Linda Randle and Reggie Smith have some falling out with the Gaither organization or with each other? Absolutely not. Every indication points to these being personal, spiritual decisions made in response to God's timing and direction in their individual lives. Was there scandal or conflict or betrayal? No evidence of that whatsoever. What happened is actually much more powerful than any drama could ever be. What happened is that two mature believers recognized a shift in their calling and had the courage to follow it, trusting that God had more for them, even if it looked different from what they'd known. What happened is that they chose obedience over obligation, purpose over platform, and peace over performance. For those of you who loved hearing Linda's voice soar or felt comforted by Reggie's steady presence, I understand the sense of loss. But I want to challenge you to reframe that feeling. Instead of mourning their absence, celebrate the years they gave. Instead of questioning their decision, trust their discernment. Instead of wishing they'd come back, pray that they're thriving in whatever God has called them to next. The best way to honor what they've given is to receive the lesson they're teaching right now. That true ministry is about following God wherever He leads, not about maintaining what's comfortable or familiar. It's about being willing to embrace new seasons even when old ones were beautiful. It's about trusting that God's plans for us are always unfolding, always developing, always leading us deeper into our purpose, even when the path doesn't make sense to observers. Here's my final thought for you, and I want you to really sit with this. The gospel that Linda and Reggie spent decades proclaiming teaches us that God is faithful, that His plans are good, that He works all things together for the benefit of those who love Him. If we truly believe that message, then we have to extend that belief to their lives too. We have to trust that the same God who used their voices to reach millions is still at work in their lives today, writing a new chapter that will ultimately bring glory to His name. Maybe that chapter involves smaller audiences. Maybe it involves no audiences at all. Maybe it looks nothing like what came before, but if they're walking in obedience, if they're following the leading of the Holy Spirit, then they're exactly where they need to be, and that should give us joy, not sadness. The legacy of Linda Randle and Reggie Smith isn't just in the songs they sang. It's in the example they set of what it means to hold your gifts loosely, to serve without seeking control, and to trust God enough to say yes to whatever He asks next. That legacy will outlast any recording, any performance, any accolade. It will continue speaking to believers who face their own crossroads and need to know that it's okay to change direction when God is redirecting. So let's honor them not by endlessly speculating about why they left or wishing that they'd return, but by learning from their faithfulness and applying it to our own lives. Let's ask ourselves the hard questions they must have asked. Let's be willing to make the hard choices they made, and let's trust that the God who called them is the same God who called us, and His plans are always, always good, even when they surprise us.